Yeah, kia ora koutou katoa, ko Ben Masters taku ingoa. Really great to be able to present effectively where we're at with Project Monga Stage 2. A few years ago, presented, I think we were kind of starting concept design stage. Now we're at the stage of beginning construction, enabling works on the main new East Wing building, and construction's underway for the new renal unit that Debbie just mentioned. What I really wanted to touch on is just kind of reflecting on the overall sustainable design approach that we've incorporated to this project, and just a few kind of, I guess, lessons learned on how to really integrate effectively on all other capital works projects going forward. So one of the key learnings is super important to have a really strong sustainability brief. The sooner this gets locked into a project, the better, and ideally before you even start designing. And the more detail, the more you can actually articulate what does good look like, what are the kind of key design principles you want locked into the project, making sure all the key stakeholders understand the benefits of why you're actually doing things. It's not always that obvious. Establishing some clear environmental sustainability targets, and then what are the must-have design inclusions to support those targets. We really kind of already know what's required to hit a lot of these low carbon energy efficiency targets. So why don't we lock them in early before we actually start designing? Also thinking wider than your capital project, the overall how your project can support decarbonisation on an existing campus, and how the two can talk to each other. Really doing all this before you start looking at Green Star and the certification tools, and really align with overall long-term value, and then also thinking about an overall effective plan to actually achieve what you set out to do. And so it really is all about performance, especially in a low carbon world. So important to really think about how you're actually going to achieve what you set out to do, benchmarking your design as you go through, and providing the facilities management team the tools to actually measure and optimize the performance of the asset once it's actually constructed. And really, ideally, setting the budget for the project once you've actually established the brief. If you set it too late, too early before you've actually established what you want to achieve and locking in the sustainability features, it's too late. We've kind of moved past that, considering sustainability as an add-on. It has to be there right up front. So this was the approach for Project Monga. Early on in the IBC stage, TDHB established an overall vision for the new East Wing building to be New Zealand's leading sustainable public hospital building. And there's some clear principles and targets are established, and then which led to some kind of clear must-haves to support those targets, and they were locked into the overall budget quite early. Then during early concept prelim, we refined the overall facade performance criteria to firm up the overall cost, and we used eco-funded energy modelling to actually optimise more on the HVAC system side of things and controls. Really important to not lose sight of what healthcare buildings are for people, and it can be quite easy to go just focus on decarbonisation, especially when it comes to building envelope. The most energy efficient, carbon efficient building envelope isn't always the most healthy and comfortable, right? So really important to not lose sight of what healthcare buildings are for. Another key part of the new East Wing project was a really robust assessment of potential climate change impacts. So we developed a bespoke climate adaptation plan focused on the building and assessing future environmental risks using NIWA data, breaking the overall project down into risks to patients and staff, and to the overall site infrastructure, systems, equipment. And it did actually have a real impact in the overall design criteria. We actually changed the overall stormwater, rainwater design, peak design, rainfall data, as well as the air conditioning, summer cooling temperature data to align with future climate change predictions. So the overall project, when it comes to sustainability, can be broken down into these three key areas. We've got the new East Wing building in the middle here, which is targeting Green Star 5-star. and the new renal dialysis unit, which is targeting net zero energy. And through the design stages, we actually identified a key opportunity to decarbonise the acute services building. It wasn't originally in the brief, but we identified a really favourable opportunity to do that as part of the new East Wing building design. So this is where the new East Wing building is currently sitting in terms of operational energy and carbon. We're benchmarking 48% reduction compared to a business as usual healthcare building design that uses gas boiler plant building, New Zealand Building Code equivalent. And it's quite significant in itself, but it also includes the overall medical plant and equipment, which is really kind of a fixed energy use, but can be really significant for healthcare buildings. When you look at operational carbon, that's slightly more at 57% less comparing to a typical gas-fired boiler plant for heating and domestic hot water. So the renal unit's targeting net zero energies. What does that mean? It's producing on-site 100% of the annual energy load for the building via on-site renewable energy, in this case, solar PV. When there's excess generation, that will get sent back to the main hospital campus, doesn't go back to the grid, and in the wintertime using grid supplied electricity when the sun isn't shining. And again, what's interesting is that we'd optimize the building pretty much as we could with a lot of computer modeling, but there's still around about 40% of the annual energy uses for the RO plant, which is very little we could actually do about reusing existing RO plant for reverse osmosis water. But it does still show that you can achieve net zero energy. It won't be as straightforward for every healthcare project, but it is possible taking into account high energy use for healthcare buildings. So the overall energy efficiency approach or sustainability approach is kind of a mix of first principle passive solar design, but then coupled with kind of leading edge building tuning analytics. One of the features that seems to resonate most with the staff is the ability to actually open windows rather than being in a sealed new air conditioned box. They've actually got the ability to open windows as part of a mixed mode ventilation strategy. And that really was there for patient and staff amenity, less for energy efficiency. And one of the other key things for this project is predominantly timber structure, timber poles, PLT, parallel laminated timber flooring. There's a tiny bit of steel, but mostly all timber structure construction. So we put this through the Brands LCA Quick calculator, and it's indicating around about an 80% less life cycle emissions, not just upfront, but life cycle emissions over 60 years compared to a typical healthcare building of concrete and steel construction, less focus on energy efficiency using gas. So it's pretty phenomenal result. This takes account of replacement or the embodied carbon on the PV panels and the replacement after 30 years. But who knows what the future will hold, but in 30 years time, the grid could be 100% renewables. So you'd probably think twice about replacing your PV panels. So the ASB Acute Services building, this was finished in 2014, I think, relatively new, but not as much of a focus on energy efficiency as it could have. We're in the process of completing building tuning using our Beca's B-Tune service, which has indicated around about a 40% reduction in whole building energy use available just by making better use of controls, focus on HVAC at a 1-year payback. That was the initial part of looking at the ASB building. The second key part is electrifying the building. Currently uses the central gas steam boiler, but as part of the new East Wing building, the new heating plant will also send heating hot water back to this building to decouple from gas. And we're also putting in a new electric steam boiler for steam generation. So when you consider all of those initiatives together, what's interesting is that the biggest one is actually the decarbonisation from ASB building, which wasn't initially part of the project brief, but we've identified that opportunity along the way. Overall, equivalent to 1,500 Kiwi homes in terms of decarbonisation, And thinking ahead to 2025, quite a major benefit to TDHB in terms of reducing what effectively, by the sounds of it, will become an overhead, having to get to carbon neutral on an annual basis. I need to mention that the decarbonisation of Building 101 and the renal unit was supported by state sector decarbonisation via Paul and the Ministry of Health. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.